Thank you all so much for being here. It's a joy to be able to talk about this work where the work is being done. I feel like so often in this life, we talk about what we do to others and not inward facing, and having to articulate my why in front of you all, which are my home, is a real gift. So we're going to talk about the power of storytelling in medicine, which is a real big phrase today. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about me and how I got here and why I think this work is meaningful. So, um, this is me, my father. He was a cardiothoracic surgeon and an avocado grower and a rancher. And I had the weirdest, wackiest childhood. When he wasn't in the OR seeing patients rounding, he was at home laying irrigation line or adopting donkeys. Every once in a while, we were allowed to let the rescue animals into the house. Where we live, where I still live today, it's a really beautiful place. This was a deeply privileged, really special, very quirky childhood, until it wasn't. So when I was 3 years old, this is us just out on the ranch. It still looks just like this, frankly. The trees are a little bigger. When I was 3 years old, my father was diagnosed with aggressive osteosarcoma, and he had Mets. He was given 6 months to live, told to get his affairs in order. And I was 3 years old. My mom was pregnant with my younger brother, and he did. And then he didn't die. Really kind of a miracle. This was, the early 80s. So chemo and radiation for bone cancer was really new. As you all know, even today, this is a terrible diagnosis without many options. And he kept not dying. The only problem was that we never knew how much time we would have. So he kept having recurrences, but we would get 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 3 months. Once we got 4 years, that was the longest we ever had. And then we would say goodbye, and he would go in for an experimental treatment of some sort. He went all over the country. And then he would see how long he had, and then we would repeat the cycle again. We lived with a kind of very audible ticking clock of mortality in the background of our lives. And it was beautiful, and it was also really hard. I was a kid, so I didn't know there was any other option. And then when I was 11, the cancer came back, and it came back in a way that he knew he was going to be closer to the end, that this was really it. And so he decided that he was going to put my brother and I in a kind of survival school, but it was going to be very specific to my father. So he would teach us all the skills that we would need to learn to be able to survive without him. But again, it was the things he cared about. So it was memorizing the respiratory system and fixing a carburetor and making sure I understood oxygen diffusion and squishing a man's eyes out if I was ever attacked, changing a tire on the tractor, really very specific dad skills. And then he did something else too. He was kind of obsessive around the history of medicine, really interested in Egyptian cardiology. And he knew that ancient Egyptian physicians had also used honey as a natural antibiotic and that it wouldn't spoil. So he became a beekeeper, and he put away as much honey as he possibly could, hoping that when I was like the age I am now today, talking to you, that I would still have some of his honey, be able to stir it into my tea and coffee. He also started a coop of doves, and he built it in the backyard. And then he put my brother in charge, and he said, these are for when your sister gets married someday. I want you to release these. I was 12, so no pressure. But these were these incredible gifts. He was trying to figure out how to be present for us in the long sweep of a life. And as you all know all too well, this is something we are all dealing with all of the time. It's just that in my family, we were able to talk about it. It was visible. So this went on for a really long time. He ended up living 14 and a half years with metastatic osteosarcoma, which to this day is still kind of a miracle. And he always said that when life got too hard with my mom, my brother, and me, he was going to die. So I grew up kind of thinking that the will to live was like a sort of light switch, and whenever you were done, you would die. Until one day I was painting my nails with a group of girlfriends, and I went looking for the nail polish remover in my parents' bathroom cabinet, and I found a small pill bottle, and there was a note wrapped around it. And I was 16, but I immediately knew what it was. It was a lethal prescription. It was his medical aid and dying medication. It was illegal in California then. This was 20 some years ago now. And I wasn't mad, I was scared, but I understood. I understood he had a line beyond which he didn't want to suffer. But I also knew it was a secret and then I wasn't supposed to say anything. I didn't say anything to anyone, not my brother, not my mom, definitely not my father. It was going to be a kind of betrayal. His way of dealing with his illness was, you are blessed, you are privileged, you will be excellent, and there's nothing to see here, you have nothing to complain about. Which was true. I was blessed, I was privileged. I didn't have that much to complain about. Also, saying goodbye to your father every 6 or 10 weeks or 6 months can be a lot. But anyway, I kind of pretended I hadn't seen it and waited. And then 6 months later, we got into a really bad fight on the phone. It was about something stupid. And I hung up on him. I was so mad. He said, "I love you, Laura," which is what he called me. And I slammed the phone down. I was a mad teenager. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say I loved him. And by the time I got home an hour later, he had taken his prescription and he was unconscious and I would never hear his voice again. And I kind of cratered with shame and guilt. Here was this person that for my entire life thus far had lived like a kind of human giving tree, trading body parts for time with us. And when it really mattered, I'd let him down. And again, instead of telling anyone any of this, because the thing that I had learned was that we work ourselves out of any discomfort, and to show that I was sad or scared would be the bad kind of vulnerability, that would be a betrayal of him, because for him, showing weakness was not really vulnerability. It was a kind of loss. I think he felt a lot of guilt that he couldn't cure himself, even though he knew better. As a physician, he felt a lot of shame in his own illness and having to stop practice. And so I took everything and I shoved it into the pursuit of shiny prizes, really. Into grades, I was like that kid in Rushmore. I was like captain of societies of 1 or 2 people just because I could. And I really tried to work my way out of my own negative feelings. And then at my high school graduation, which was later that year, I opened a box. And my mom handed it to me. I didn't really want to open it. She was like, "This is your last present from your dad." And I opened it and it was this pen. And the note with it said, "Dear Laura, I hope you use this to sign your first book someday. Love you, Dad." Like, what a gift, right? Like, it's amazing. I wanted to be a writer. I've wanted to be a writer since I was like old enough to read a book. But what 16-year-old kid becomes what they want to be when they grow up, right? Probably most of you, but that's not true in most rooms, And he believed in me, and what a gift. Like, he could see possibilities for me that I couldn't even dream of. I'd never met a writer in my life. Also, what a kind of prescription, right? Like, I took this as marching orders. I did use this to sign my first book. I got a PhD, I did all the, I took all the dreams for him, all of the unlived life that he had wanted, and I turned it into a to-do list, and I just did it. And every day I crossed something off that to-do list, shoving all of my, fears that I wasn't good enough into things like this. I really believed that if other people thought I was good, that maybe I could convince myself I was good, because someone who is good is not someone who hangs up on their dying father. Except some of you may also have this coping mechanism, and that eventually it stops working. You can't outrun, you can't outwork your own worry of whether or not you're okay enough, whether or not you're good enough for the people that love you, or your patients, your colleagues, your friends. And eventually, I needed to find something else, And I learned this the hard way. On the outside, I was here. I had a professorship, right? I was on the Times list. All of these dreams that I couldn't even imagine as a kid were coming true. And on the inside, I was anxious. I was fearful. I will say I felt very at home here around many other like highly achieving people. But I knew something was wrong. I couldn't stay in a relationship. When people got close to me, I would get a little nervous and I would back away. If you're worried that you're not okay inside, it's very hard to let other people near you lest they find the truth. And I was in the middle of a breakup. I was driving down 101 South. I was actually headed here. I was driving really fast, away from my girlfriend at the time who loved me dearly. And I turned on the radio and I heard of this American Life episode about a place in Utah called the Sharing Place. And it's a grief support center for children and young people. And they were interviewing the head of the center. And they asked her, well, what's at stake if kids don't get grief support when they're going through something hard? She was like, well, if they get close to people, they tend to run away. And here I was like driving towards Palo Alto at like 98 miles an hour, not that much, but I was driving fast and it felt like so on the nose. And so I pulled the car over and I immediately started Googling like kid, grief, sad, San Francisco and support. And I called a bunch of places. I found that we had one in the Bay. There's actually a great one that we could talk about in Palo Alto to support young people who've had a loss recently. But I found Josie's Place, which was in San Francisco. And I called and I remember I left like the most embarrassing journalistic message of my life. And I was like, hi, my name is Laurel and I'm a writer and I work at the Stanford School of Medicine and but I'm also like a bereaved kid, but wait, no, I'm a bereaved adult, I think. Can I do your program maybe? And hung up. I was so embarrassed. She called me back. I called every organization of this type in the United States. They all told me, that's wonderful. We're so happy you're interested in our work, Laurel, but also that's really creepy. You cannot enroll as a child in our program. You are 38 years old. And what they did tell me was that I could become a facilitator, that I could train to do grief support with the young people. And in doing that, I would be able to do all of the things that they were doing, and I would have all of the learning. And maybe I might find a community of my own because the other facilitators all had losses as well. So that's what I did. I would come down here, I would teach, and then on the way home, I was living in a houseboat at the time in Sausalito. On the way home, I would stop and I would facilitate these grief support groups with other volunteers at night. And it was incredible. One thing that happened is it forced me to interrogate some of my own stories I had about myself and my worth. I saw so many of these kids also felt that they were bad. They were worried they'd messed up. The last interaction with their parent, some of them had been here, it was a fight. Or they'd left the hospital room and gotten a snack, and that's when their parent or their sibling had died. And they felt that they were bad. They felt that they were wrong. They felt that they had messed up. And I could so clearly see that the bad things that happened in these kids' lives weren't their fault, that I was forced to admit that I too wasn't at fault. The other thing, that they did, which is great, and I have since tried to integrate into my work with many of you, is that they were getting a kind of life skills training that I wish my father had given to me, but he hadn't gotten himself, which is that if we turn away from the hardest things, they stay at our heels. This is a hospital room at the Dougie Center, which is a kind of mothership for children and adolescent grief support. It's in Portland, Oregon. It's one of my favorite places on this earth. They have a miniature hospital room in there. They have an actual pediatric bed. They have tiny x-ray machines. They even have a curtain that works on the rollerball, so it sounds just like a clinical space. And the adults walk through the Dougie Center and they open the door to this childlike hospital room, and then they close it immediately and they keep going. It scares them. And the kids open the door to this room and they rush in and they immediately pretend to be you all. They pretend to have wings. They become superheroes. They fly to the scene of accidents. They save the people that they love. They come up with medications. They develop new treatments. They have conversations with people. They get to say goodbye to the people that they didn't get to say goodbye to in real life. They use their imagination. They use their creativity to redo the stories, to give themselves new endings than the ones they got in life. And I looked at that and I was like, why does it only get to be them? Why can't it be us too? Right? But I can't make you all pretend to go into this. You're already in this room, frankly. And I can't pretend with you in the same way, but we have figured out some ways to do this for ourselves as adults that don't feel quite as silly, although sometimes they do. And in doing it, it's this. Maria's mom died of colon cancer a few weeks before she told me this. We were sitting there coloring. She looks over at me And she asked me how my day was. And I was like, well, actually, I'm like a little sad. And she was like, well, Laurel, the worst thing you can do when you're sad is try not to be sad. And I was like, oh my God, where have you been for 40 years? Um, but that's the kind of wisdom these kids had. They talk like little sages. They've seen too much, frankly, in their lives thus far, but they have so much wisdom to share with us. So here I was, on this journey. I was learning so much from them. I was trying to take what I was learning from these kids and build it into my coursework and things here to support you all. And then because when, you say that you're working on trying to face hard things, life is nothing if not a buffet of things that come when you don't want them, to test you. And everything that my father had tried to prepare and save for us was gone. This was the Thomas Fire in winter 2017, 2018. It came for our home, it burned everything down. So the only family photos I have now are mostly the ones you're seeing in this talk here. We lost everything except some of the trees, a shed, a few other things. But I was forced in real time to try to practice some of the things that I was learning. This is the house after the fire. And then in the middle of the pandemic, while we're living in a construction zone, trying to rebuild, my mom was diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer, and given a very quick, terrible prognosis. And we vowed that we would do things differently this time. Now I had all of this training that I had from the young people. I had spent a lot of time with you all, learning how you have difficult conversations and can. And we promised each other that this time no one would be left wondering if they'd messed up. No one would be left wondering how much she loved them, or if she knew how much she was treasured and adored. And so we had a living memorial service for her. This is it. A few weeks before she died, she too chose to do medical aid in dying, although it was legal now, as you know. And we said our piece to one another. And it was terrible. Goodbye is terrible. I hate goodbyes. Hate. The worst thing that can happen is for me to fall in love with someone. I get so angry. And also, this was the gift of my life. Being able to say it, having time. We all have that. We all have the opportunity all of the time. And we were lucky that we had the time, frankly, even though it was in the middle of the pandemic and there were so many other constrictions on it. So I tell you all of this because it's a frame for how I use this pen now. So I use the pen. I have signed every book with it. And now I use it in a metaphorical sense, to help other people learn how to tell their most difficult stories, to find meaning in the hardest things that happen to them. Because I feel like I learned a lot of this the hard way. If I could go back in time and tell the trainee version of myself, the college student of myself, the 20, 30, frankly, the 37-year-old version of myself, that she might avoid a little bit of suffering by turning towards rather than away. I just could have avoided a lot of pain, or rather, I could have found meaning and a kind of bittersweet knowing in that pain before. And I love clinical spaces. I used to have a little nurse's outfit and go, my dad worked at our county hospital, and I used to go in my nurse outfit and round in the cardiac ICU and eat all the little ice creams with the little wooden spoon. And I think I've spent most of my adult life trying to get back there, even today. And the reason I think I feel so comfortable in our joint spaces is because I believe that storytelling is the oldest medical technology. I really do. I think there's no better story prompt than when you walk into a room and someone says, "What brings you in today?" Right? Or "Tell me about why you're here," or "Tell me what your concerns are." Right? These are the ultimate storytelling prompts. Unfortunately, I don't have to tell you, so much of medicine has moved away from that. We have less and less time to have those meaningful conversations, especially those of you often in anesthesia. But it matters. The second reason is, the placebo effect, which we all know, is I think the proof of the power of storytelling What we tell ourselves heals us, and what we tell ourselves hurts us, right? That exists alongside everything else. But the stories we tell ourselves matter. They affect us. They affect one another. Now, as Natalia said, I have worked with thousands of healthcare professionals here and around the world, virtually, in person, pretty much every branch of healthcare you can imagine, also leadership of healthcare institutions of every kind. And I can tell you, overwork is a problem. And the too long work week is an absolute problem. But I believe our real problem is when what we do all day doesn't match up with what we believe our purpose is. When we spend too much time in the electronic medical record instead of actually doing things that we believe matter and are meaningful. None of you are scared of hard work. You wouldn't be here, right? What scares us, I believe, is work that doesn't have a point, work that feels useless, or work that is busy work. So one thing that I can do, the project of being a writer, the project of storytelling, is figuring out a narrative, making meaning over something often complicated, right? It's also under the psychiatric field in some ways. My hero is Bruce Lee. And, he said, don't pray for the strength. Don't pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to survive a difficult one. If I could have that tattooed on me somewhere visible as I walk through a room, I would love it. Meaning is the goal, not ease, not pleasure in this life. I believe this strongly with every cell of my being. And that is why I love working in medicine, because I think you all believe that too. You operate on the front lines of human experience. You help people navigate their hardest choices. You explain complex medical information. You lay out the stakes. You are with people on their hardest days, their scariest days, their best days, their most fearful days, and you walk people through that and yourselves. And then you're supposed to take all of this and then just like go to Trader Joe's. Like that's insane. That is truly insane. Okay. So how can storytelling help you? Now, I will never say that a storytelling workshop is going to fix what's broken in the American healthcare system, right? That's like patronizing and offensive. What I will say is that it's an adjuvant therapy, that it can exist alongside all the big change, the structural change that so many of you are doing in this room, right? To make our lives more bearable, meaningful, pleasurable, and joyful. But why does storytelling do this? Because it makes the invisible visible. You ever read something and you're like, oh, right? It's almost a physiological feeling that someone has explained something that you couldn't give words to, right? For me, that's like a feeling I feel in my chest when I hear, watch, read something where someone articulates a feeling that I have but couldn't have given name to, okay? Secondly, it allows us to see or feel through another's eye or heart. When you put down a book that you've been loving and it's like kind of a sadness, you're like, oh, it's because you have to leave that world. You've literally left your body and your life for a few hours. A film can do the same thing. A great podcast can do the same thing. And then you're like, oh man, I have to stop being whatever this like Court of Thorn and Roses fairy is. And now I've got to go to work, right? Or I have to leave this spy thriller, go to work, or I have to leave this like gripping narrative nonfiction book and return to my life. It's kind of sadness when you turn off the television or you put down the book. That's because you've been someone else. You've been given respite from your own life for a brief period and seen the world, experienced it as somebody else. I think that's a gift. And for me, it helps me figure out what I think. I think much better. I shouldn't say this while giving a talk, but I think much better with my fingertips than with my mouth most of the time. Right? Sometimes even before I'm going to have a complex conversation, I'll like write myself an email about it because it's easier to type it and there's something less shaming about like the tiny little box, right? I think that's why Twitter is like useful, right? It like shrinks the world. It's in itself as a prompt. And then finally, the good stories remind us that we're not alone, right? Like you read them, you nod, you say, oh, I've had something like that happen to me too. Even if you've read a memoir about someone's life, it's completely different than yours, right? It's a kind of meta and I think to loneliness. Secondly, so many of you here doing this work are public health advocates, whether you articulate it to yourself or not. And I think this is really important. If you see things that drive you crazy about the American healthcare system, locally, globally, If you add a story to your frustrations, you get advocacy work. Advocacy that is story-based, there is nothing more powerful on this earth. If you get other people to feel the way you feel, they will do what you wish them to do. Okay, so that is also why I do this. So how do we do this? Honestly, I try to get people out of here as much as I possibly can. And maybe the bravest, craziest thing I've done is gone to my amazing mentor, Audrey Schaefer, who many of you know. I am here because of the grace of you all, but also Audrey, who saw in me someone who might be helpful in the field of medicine and gave me, opened the door for me. And when I went to her and I said, okay, cool, I'd love to teach here. But I don't want to do it inside. I'd like to do it on farms where people's phones don't work. And she was like, cool, okay. And said yes. And that has been one thing that we get to do. I wish I could do it with you all, but I do it with the clinical students. So we have 3 farms locally that we rent out for a day or 2. I bring them there. This is a recent class. This is at Soul Food Farm in Vacaville. The fall workshop, we camp overnight. And I bring in people, I bring in powerful storytellers in media, in medicine, and I have them talk. This is Simin Nosrat, who's a chef of Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. She came and talked to them about writing about sensory experience in food. I've had Rebecca Skloot, author of The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, come in and teach. I've had the producers of the New York Times Daily Show. And then I've had often, like many of our faculty, Alyssa Burkhardt has done wonderful work with our students. This past weekend, and Bechi Arandu came. We did one at George Mark House, which is the first palliative care home for children in the United States in San Leandro. We did it on Saturday, and Bechi came. And as a fiction writer and as a pediatric palliative care physician and anesthesiologist, she spoke to writing about grief. We also had the medical director speak to the students. They toured the facility, saw some of the families and patients, and then we spent the rest of the day writing about our most difficult and complicated feeling. My hope, with all of this work, not just with the clinical students, is that I arm you all with the kinds of skills so that you don't have to wait to be called up by a journalist to be interviewed. Right? Like, we live in a world where all of us can speak directly now to the American public, and frankly, that we should. We saw during COVID, what happens when our frontline healthcare professionals aren't given, say, media training. It all falls on someone like Anthony Fauci to combat medical misinformation in the public square. That's an unfair ask. Right? We should all be doing it. We should all feel empowered and emboldened to speak directly, vulnerably, clearly, interestingly, entertainingly. Like, we are competing with TikTok, guys. Like, we have to be really good storytellers, right? Or people will leave a clinical visit, they will leave an interaction in medicine, and they will get on Facebook and they will forget what we have told them, right? The stakes couldn't be higher. So what do we offer? Education. So we teach courses. I teach many courses every year, but the lion's share of my work is actually working one-on-one, primarily with faculty and other folks. And I think, one thing, if you leave today, that I hope you leave with, is that I am here for you. I am a resource. We set up weekly calls and you tell me your goals. So I offer education in craft, structure, clarity, focus. Many of you have not written creatively since you were in high school. So what does that mean? How do we return to that? How do we find your playful, creative spirit and bring it back in a rigorous way that makes you feel empowered to share your own stories? What are your publishing goals? We do a lot of speaker training and coaching. And that can even be for, the ASA. Okay. This doesn't have to be for like your moth or your podcast interview coming up. Okay. This can be, how do I talk about my research in a way that is just not going to make people's eyes glaze over, right? How do I design better slides? So, we offer support articulating goals, creative and otherwise, editorial feedback, publishing support, market and audience understanding. That's something, that doesn't come in the course of your normal life. Like, let's say you want to be an occasional op-ed writer for the New York Times or the Washington Post. What does that mean? How do you understand your audience? How does that change your voice? Demystification of writing, speaking, public communication of science, and public health processes. When I first started out, I was like, well, how do you get a literary agent? That seems weird and hard. And what does publishing mean? And what's the difference between publishing with an academic press and a popular press? And why am I want to do one and not the other? And also, how much should I get paid for my writing? And what do I do with that? This one is really big. Accountability. I'd say that's a huge part of what I do. Someone comes to me and they say, listen, I really want to write a popular book about anesthesia. Ooh, can I do it in the next 6 months? And first I laugh and give them a hug. And then I say, you will finish this in 3 years and it's okay. Like, I'm not going to leave you. And we come up, or more than 3 years. But I have full confidence that they will finish it. And we come up with a plan. And then me and my assistant pester you when you miss your deadlines and ask about how we can support you better. And then the most important, community. I have met now some of the best friends of my life here in helping them articulate their own stories and learning about them. You know, I would never say that this work is wellness because the most unwell people I know are writers, and I am not a mental health professional. But what I will tell you is that if you want to write persuasively and well, first you have to figure out how you think and feel, because an audience will see right through that. So doing the work to be a good communicator, you must do the work of self-reflection first. And that work tends to make you feel better, right? And I'm someone that if you just, and for most of my life, if you had just told me that I should go to therapy and it would be good for me, I would have said, I am too busy for that. Thank you so much. No, thank you. But if you had told me that if I could become a writer if I sat still and articulated some of my own scariest feelings, then I would have done it because I wanted to be in the New York Times, right? That is true for most of us. So maybe you come to Alyssa and I have had the pleasure of teaching a popular op-ed and personal essay course together for healthcare professionals. If you come to a course like that because you want to be a columnist, great. If you leave having spent a little bit of time that you wouldn't otherwise, wondering how you feel about something, even better, okay? This is just an example. Natalia mentioned, we have fiction writers, we have nonfiction writers, the publications, the books, the talks, the pieces, they have been everywhere in academic journals to popular presses, places like McSweeney's, JAMA, Peace of My Mind, New England Journal Perspectives, the ASA Monitor. I put 2 of Alyssa's op-eds in here because you all should know about her great work communicating publicly if you don't already. And then this is a great one, KQED perspectives. We've had a number of students. I would love to see someone in anesthesia successfully pitch perspectives. You basically make a 2-minute audio note on your phone. You can do it while you are walking to your car at the end of a day, and you submit it to KQED. It's often about something that kind of angers you in medicine or something that you've seen, and you put it inside a story, and I can help you with that. And then it goes out to like 20, 30 million people in the morning. It's such an easy, quick way to spend 2 minutes of your time on something that you feel passionate about. And you don't even have to type it up. You just record it. So these are the kinds of things that the writing and storytelling program helps people with. Everything from poetry submissions in academic journals to short and long form fiction to nonfiction book proposals, articles, really anything that you can think of when it comes to public communication is something that I am here to help you with. I am a nonfiction writer, both long form and short form, and I do a bunch of radio and the occasional newspaper piece. But if it's something that I can't do, I connect you with others. So as Natalia said, we just this last 2 weeks, we have 2 clinical students who got literary agents and are working on selling nonfiction book proposals, one about the history of reproductive science and medicine and the making of family in the United States, and the other one about Norman Shumway and the history of cardiac surgery and the development of biomedical ethics in the United States in relation to cardiac surgery. Both of them have spent 3 years with me working on these book proposals to get to the point of selling the book and the agent. So I don't want to tell you that this isn't a large investment of time, but what in your life has been worth it that wasn't, this is a skill that you must learn just like you have learned every other skill. It takes practice, but I think it's a meaningful addition to your medical career. The other reason that this is great, this is something that Audrey Schaefer has said multiple times, is that storytelling has helped her with the gray areas of medicine. As you well know, medicine is not a multiple choice situation. There's very clearly one right answer or one way something could have been done. But often the way that we, all of us are trained in the American school system or very often abroad, and certainly in clinical training, is that that's not necessarily true. So the humanities are a place where there are no right answers. And you can hang in the confusion for a little bit. One thing that we've done, we had a required, still actually have a required medical humanities course. And we brought in the Stanford palliative care folks to lead a communications workshop. And what we did was make greeting cards for impossible situations. And so this is one of the students' greeting cards for a patient. Like, if you could change the inventory of Hallmark card, what would you make as a trainee? And this is one of the things they came up with. I would say, a way to sum it up is this. This is a death doula I actually really admire, named Alua Arthur. And she often says that death is the period at the end of the sentence that gives life meaning. And I think, this is what is woven through medicine. This is the water that we swim in. It is in acknowledging this and figuring out how to work this into our training, not as something that we avoid, but something that we find meaning from, to teach us how to connect with others and make our work more meaningful for ourselves is great. So in the beginning of the pandemic, March 2020, this was back in like the Tiger King sourdough bread making phase of the pandemic, when we thought it was just going to be a few weeks and then it would be over. You all were working and I wasn't. I was stuck at home and feeling like I wanted to be useful. And so I had never before taken this work away from Stanford. And what I did was kind of have a birthday party online and see if anyone would come. And I said, okay, we're going to call it Writing Medicine, and we'll meet every Saturday until the pandemic is over. And it's free, and any healthcare professional from around the world or their loved one can come. And I thought we'd maybe get like 10 people or something. And shocker, it's 2024. We are still meeting. The next one is this Saturday. It's led by a student of mine who I trained, who is now a psychiatrist at Columbia, Dr. Pablo Romano. And it's ballooned. So we've had over 100 sessions since March 2020. I think it's actually like 170 now. We've had well over 15,000 participants from all over the world, dozens of publications. Now it's pay what you can, and it's every other Saturday, or if I'm doing something like this, I don't offer it. But it's created a really incredible kind of community, and it's shown me that you don't need a farm to do this work, and you don't need a Stanford, who I adore and am grateful for. But honestly, this work is very nearly free. What you need is a leadership of where you work that allows you protected paid time to do it. And then the reflection itself is basically free. And what we found through doing this work is that it was a kind of accidental wellness intervention. Even though, as I said, I never set out to do that and wouldn't. But what we find from this group is pretty amazing. So this session helped me find meaning, think more clearly, process some of my recent emotions. People feel drastically a deeper connection to others, more invigorated to return to their daily life. And this is an hour on a Saturday morning on Zoom, renewed sense of purpose. So all of this is to say, I think it comes down to, it's not about the publications. It's not about even using your pen. Really what this is, if you are a good storyteller who functions as part of a community, is being the kind of person who reminds others who they really are. And that is, I think, what we should be striving for in medicine. It should be with your colleagues. It should be with your patients. It should be with the people that you supervise and work with. That's all this work really does, is when you help other people articulate meaning, what you're doing is helping people articulate who they want to be. Another way of saying this is being a good elevator person. You want to be the person that when people get in the elevator with you, they don't sort of pull out their phone, right? And scoot away. And really the way you do this is by listening. I don't have to tell you that. I think the biggest gift you can give a busy healthcare professional is asking them a good question and then just stepping back and giving them unlimited time to answer. The other thing that I would love to see us all do, I wanted to give you we'll make this quick, just a couple hot tips to take away today. If you don't want to spend the rest of today writing and you have to head into the OR. is that one way to practice this kind of storytelling work is just by asking better questions. So one thing I assign to people who start working with me is like Terry Gross interviews. I think that healthcare professionals should be trained by journalists to ask questions, not necessarily other healthcare professionals. So what's an example? If you take one thing away from today, I want it to be that you never ask someone this again. Never. Okay. This question is a killer. Most of the time, this is just code for word, and then someone says word back to you. Like you're not supposed to answer it. And if you answer honestly, it's a kind of social betrayal, a betrayal of social norms, right? I can tell you this because I often answer honestly at the grocery checkout and I make someone really uncomfortable. But I just hate this question on principle. So what do you do instead? Okay. Here are 3 examples. Is there a superpower you wish you had today? What's a question? I love this second one. Instead of how are you, what's a question you wish someone would ask you right now or today? Or, this is probably, one you might ask as a parent or something, but it really helps in a professional context too. What's your most surprising win or loss this week? I actually have 30, but we don't have time to show them all today. But if you email me, my email is just lbrait@stanford.edu. I will send you the list of 30 questions to ask instead of how are you? And I learned this at home. When my husband and I were first together, we were long distance, and he would call me and he would say, ask me how I was. And it was just so stultifying. By the end, I was just like, if you ask me that again, I'm going to hang up on you. And I did it. And then he hasn't asked me ever again. He asked me better questions now. And then this is the other key. When they respond, you don't respond with your own answer to that question. You say, tell me more about that. Okay. And that's how we do it. The other way to do this work, and I also have a long list of prompts that if you don't want to work with me one-on-one, I can also send to you, is take 7 minutes a month, 7 minutes every 6 months. This does not have to be a daily practice. I was a college athlete. I was a rower, and we had these horrible things called erg tests that lasted 7 minutes on the rowing machine. It made me want to die. But I know that I can survive 7 minutes of wanting to die. This is why I never, ever make people write for more than 7 minutes, because I know that you're going to be able to do it. Right? You set the bar low so that you can exceed it. Right? This creative practice, this reflective practice should be a place that doesn't make you feel bad. We have enough of that. Okay, so you want doable, achievable goals. And then these are some examples of prompts. This is my equivalent of the hospital room at the Dougie Center. Okay, these are the creative ways. This is what I give busy clinicians and academic faculty and trainees, so that you have to spend a little bit of time in your imaginary place, right? And think. This is a great one to practice even today as you're roaming around. You're with people you don't know very well. Someone asks you a question, you almost always give the short answer to. Give the long answer instead. It's a kind of magical question, right? We all have that question. And then this final one, you go into the grocery store, and when you return to your car, there's someone you love and no longer have in your life waiting for you. What happens? That's one I wouldn't do on a break, right? So you kind of have to decide like what your emotional bandwidth is in a moment, deciding which room to go into. But setting a timer and bringing this work into your life, or just asking a kind of question and going around instead of like, what is your favorite Halloween candy? Or, what did you do this weekend? Right? Those are great. No shade to those questions, but it won't give you a more meaningful connection to people around you, right? Like it's kind of safe and unsatisfying. And that's what I want to change. And then finally, our big rule in writing medicine and now everywhere else that I teach and work with others is that you cannot apologize before you share something. And you would be shocked. Literally every single person tries to apologize before they share something. I only had 7 minutes, or I haven't done this well, or I feel rusty, or I'm in accounting. I can't possibly do it. Listen, it's one thing that I've taken from the kids that we need to bring back as adults in the pursuit of excellence, right? Is that kind of fear, that need and desire to quote unquote sound professional, right? It got all of you here, but it's actually alienating when it comes to communicating powerfully with others. It pushes people away rather than brings them close. So the last thing you want to do with this is try to sound smart and professional. You want to sound like yourself, and you are smart. Therefore, it will work, right? But it's a different voice than the grant application voice and the fellowship writing voice and everything else. And that's something that takes a little while to unlearn. Again, this one, I can't stress it enough. And then, I think what's at stake here is your legacy. It's maybe a little cliche, but people don't remember what you taught them. I feel this really strongly as a teacher. They remember how you made them feel. If you can give others the pen that you learned to use, I think that's the kind of holy grail. As I said, the great gift that both my parents gave me, frankly, was seeing a future that I couldn't yet see. That is, I think, what we do when we engage people in meaningful communication. We remind them what they're capable of, who they really are. And that is a legacy that I really believe worth protecting and working towards. It's a kind of outcome that people will take with them, maybe even into the beyond. And I'd love to share with the first one of you who comes to me and says, Laurel, I didn't know we had a writer in residence, or maybe you did. And I've decided it's been a really long time, but I want to do a creative work. After the fire, we found a couple 10-gallon buckets of my dad's honey in a shed. We cleaned them off. We decrystallized them, and now I have his honey left. Which is amazing. And I have a couple little jars, and I will give one of those little jars to one of you who decide you want to do this too, as a reminder, because I believe in you. So I can't thank you enough. It's just a gift to be here. It's a gift to work with you all. It's been the gift of my life, is the truth. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. I want to open it up for some questions now. Do we have anyone in the audience who has a question or comment for Laurel?
So Laurel, first, thank you for everything you've done for the department and the school. It's been very impactful. You shared a little bit of your life here today, and you share more of it in your book. How do you get the courage to talk about things that may be embarrassing, shame, guilt, etc., in public?
Oh my God! First of all, thank you for believing that this work matters. First of all, that's not a given, and I cannot tell you how grateful I am. I don't feel brave about that, is the truth. But I do it anyway. For me, I felt for a long time I misunderstood what bravery was. That's what a lot of my most recent book is about. And I did all these things that I thought sounded big and exciting. I moved to the Amazon by myself, and I went to Alaska and I studied grizzly bears, and I did all these like Indiana Jones-ish feats of bravery. Where in truth, what scared me the most was like feeling my own anxiety, feeling my own fear, letting myself fall in love and then have to risk losing someone. When it comes to writing about it, well, the truth is I was really scared for you to read it. And, I was like, oh my God, like the leadership at the Stanford School of Medicine is going to be reading about my queer Barbie sex, like it's a memoir. So there's like a lot of things in there that, like, to tell a true story about your life, you have to share some of the things you wouldn't even talk about at like a dinner party among friends sometimes. And so what I do is that I when I'm writing, I have to pretend that no one's going to read it. I pretend that I'm writing for like a younger version of myself, honestly, or like a good friend I have in mind. And then it's kind of a shock when it like comes out and you're on the radio and people are asking you questions about it, or I'm still shocked that I get to do this and that I'm here. And, it's not something I take for granted, and it's never easy. But for me, the scariest thing is like having lost the people I love, like after that, I'm like, well, what's the worst that can happen? Like I get a bad review, so I think there is a way that like grief is helpful in some sense, that the stakes, which you all know, and I think working in medicine is the same. It kind of shows you what a real problem is, and like writing is never a real problem, let's say. That's the answer. Sheila.
Laurel, you are amazing.
So
you truly are. So this is a question from Melissa Burhow. Not everyone wants a spotlight on them, but still wants to share their story. Recommendations for the introvert who wants to share, but not keen on a lot of anonymous attention.
Oh my God, I love this question. Yes. I mean, pen names exist for a reason. It's like the most ancient technology for this. Come up with a great pen name. But also, you know, there's places you can publish. Last night, with some of the newer faculty, we were talking about, you know, writing on LinkedIn, for example. I think that's a great way. It's not anonymous, but it's a much smaller contained space. I think you can do it in your private Instagram account. I think that you can have an email newsletter that people have to sign up for, and you can monitor that list. I think that you can do it, like I said, you can bring those prompts and those questions to the family dinner table. You can scale this kind of work to the interpersonal, to the global, and engage in it in literally any way. So I think learning storytelling skills is important just for self-knowledge. And then however you want to deploy those is great. I think the spotlight can be like your phone flashlight, you know, or it can be the TED stage. And for most people, they're going to find somewhere in the middle. And also there's different, you know, I work with a lot of trainees and clinical students, and there's a lot at stake. Like, frankly, we still are inside a medical system where maybe you cannot write about episodes of self-harm before you apply to residency, for example. I would love to see that change. I would love to, and we have people like Shireen Hidari and many others who are here on faculty writing really bravely and vulnerably about mental health as physicians. And that helps change things. But we're not quite there yet. And I also believe, you know, you shouldn't have to wait till you have tenure to be honest about your life. But that's not really where we are. So I also think there are tactical times where sharing might be good and where sharing might be less good for you professionally. And so before anyone publishes something sensitive, for example, I try to pull together like an advisory board for a student with a residency director in a field in which they might be applying to, faculty, me, other people, to kind of weigh in and sort of see, is this a good idea to publish now, or should we wait 5 or 6 years? So that really depends. And frankly, sometimes you cannot write about patients or other interactions until someone is dead. You know, I couldn't have written my last book if my parents had been alive. I was too scared of their approval. And I love them too much, and I wouldn't want them to be hurt. My mom read it before she died, and she loved it. But I couldn't have written about my dad in the same way. So any other questions? Thank you, Melissa. None? All right.
We need more Javier.
Thank you for
Thank
some of the reflective tips provided today. I wonder if you can provide some insight or equally tips that we can use on our own patients in the ICU, even this week, even just in a few hours when I'm rounding. I'm going to be rounding on a patient who is young and who is dying and is struggling to manage the narrative of what to pass down to her family, to her young kids. And I wonder if you can provide some tips that I could use with her, like consider this in your writing, or what to say, what words can I use to empower her? Thank you.
Oh my God, what a generous, she's so lucky you were her physician. Firstly, so thank you for that. Honestly, I think I would give you, in some sense, the opposite advice, which is that now I am like the go-to person for when someone is like dying, with, particularly if they work in medicine with children, like, how do I tell the kids and what do I leave? And I think that she's probably already feeling so much pressure. You know, like there's a million websites that will tell you to like write a birthday card for every year that, you know, you're not alive, that they can open it on their birthday. And I think her work is done in some sense already. And if she's concerned about this, she's probably already been an incredible parent. And so easing some of the burden for her to take off some of the pressure of the things that she must do now, I think is the thing. If she chooses to leave them a voice memo, excellent. If she chooses to buy them a pen of their own or whatever would be meaningful for her kids, great. But I think people at the end of their life, it's like another thing we do to patients is to like put this big thing on them, like, if you must say goodbye. And I think it was my father left me all these things, right? But when it came down to it, like, he couldn't say goodbye. And I think he might have been fearful that if I had been there, if I had gotten home, if he had told me what he was going to do, I just wonder, we were so close, if he would have been able to do it. And so instead, he kind of let me wonder, not purposely. I don't think he assumed I'd think I was bad or messed up. I don't think that occurred to him. But I think even when we're trying, right, like there's no such thing as a goodbye. Like it's impossible. Like you cannot say goodbye to the people that you love. And so there's so much attention now. And like, you know, End Well is this big end of life conference is happening at the end of this week in Los Angeles. And I go every year and I speak and, you know, it's great. But also my main message there is like, cool, we're trying, but it sucks, right? Like we cannot Pinterest death. Like in the end, like we can do better and we should do better, right? And far too many people die in the ICU than they should. People die in clinical spaces in ways that they shouldn't. We often extend life-saving measures that we shouldn't. I believe more people should have access to medical aid in dying in states beyond California and Oregon and the few where it exists. But I think it's also kind of a trap to think that there's a good way to do it. You know, and so if there is a way that you can kind of give her ease or ask her questions about how she's feeling about the pressure of goodbye, that might help her figure out what are the things that I actually can do that are doable. So that's my advice, rather than give her like a list of prompts. If she says, oh my gosh, I want to write something every day and I have the energy for that. I worked with Brooke Gabster. Did any of you know Brooke Gabster? She was an incredible resident physician here who died also of osteosarcoma. And she really wanted to write as she was dying and throughout her illness. And she wrote beautifully. But I could see that towards the end of her life, it was more of a chore, you know. And the last thing that someone should have is a to-do list when they're leaving, you know. I think one thing too that you could offer, and I'm happy to give you some resources, is like if she has kids, there is a way that I think so many dying parents are eased when they realize that there is a world of support for their kids going forward, which is something I didn't have access to and didn't understand until I was an adult. And no matter where in the country they happen to be, there's incredible support. We have Camp Kesem, which is here, which is, you know, a grief support camp for kids. But there's so many resources around the country. And I think that eases a dying parent's mind more than any like card they write, you know. Is it a kind of assurance that, listen, like this will be the crucible that forms them for better or worse. This will be their blessing. This will be their curse. And also like, I saw this lady give a talk today. She was kind of okay, you know. But I think there's hope in that. Well, but I'm happy to talk further. Any other questions?
There's a question online about overcoming imposter syndrome.
Oh, I'd love that person to explain it to me. I don't know. You know, I think we have it. I think it's okay. I mean, Danny, do you still have it? Okay. I mean, what? Come on. If you have it, right? Like we all have it. I think it's all right. It's not something to overcome. That's my short answer. Don't worry. It'll keep you humble, and your heroes have it too. That's what I would say. You just sit with it. Any other questions? How are we doing on time?
We're okay, I think. Well, there's one question online, which is going to take me a minute. Thank you for sharing this gift with all of us. This from Daryl Oakes. I think you've met her.
Thank you, Daryl, for all of your work.
How do you help people get past the constant self-editor?
Oh, that's the worst.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Did I cut that off?
No, that's
Okay.
it.
Self-editing is toxic and terrible. And you must do it, but you can't do it on a first draft. So do never, ever edit a first draft as you go. I like to anthropomorphize my internal critic and editor as a kind of Sesame Street monster who's really obnoxious. And I do a little visualization where I ask them to go sit outside the room in which I am writing. And then I invite them back in again at like draft 3 or 4, but not before that. Because Daryl, if you let them in too quickly, you'll stop. That fear that it's not good, because it's not good. It's supposed to not be good. Your first like 5 drafts will actually not be good. So that's the point. So you must remember that. One of my mentors is Cheryl Strayed. She wrote Wilds, a wonderful writer. And she says that the feeling of writing a book is that you can't write a book. And I really hold that. I feel like the feeling of writing an article is that you can't really write this article. The feeling of preparing a big scary talk is that you can't do the talk. And that's how I know I'm doing it. And I didn't know that the first time I wrote anything, but now that I'm written a bunch of things, I know that it's the very feeling of doing creative work is that you can't do creative work. And that itself is comforting. So yeah, anthropomorphize your Sesame Street not imposter, but your editorial shrill voice and ask them to wait outside.
Thank you. And Audrey Schaefer is listening.
Oh, hi, Audrey.
She says, thank you for all you do. The program you created has been so important to many. As a leader in the space in an academic setting, what are the key things that departmental, school, and university leadership can do for you to continue to grow your program and work?
Oh my God, look at that good mentorship in action there with that question. Thank you, Audrey. Funding is the truth. Funding and protected time for people. I don't think, like with most wellness, and Natalia, you know much more about this than I, but with most wellness, it can't be things we ask people to do independently. Wellness is a community and a structural issue, not an individual one. Despite American culture telling us that we need to buy a face mask and take a bath, and that if we're burned out or overwhelmed, it's our fault. It's not, it's structural. And I think this work needs to be taken seriously for what it is. And to do that, we need funding to buy people's time to do it. I never want this work, even though writing medicine has been like volunteer time from participants. Like, I think the future should be that this should be considered a core aspect of medical training and practice. And to do that, we need to value it financially. Since we work inside a capitalist medical system, we have to assign a monetary value to this work and take it seriously and pay for it. So that's what I need. We have a waiting list for every time we offer, like the class we just did this past weekend, we have a waiting list. There's only one of me. I have a long waiting list of people with projects that, you know, they want to talk about. I wish I could give people more time. I wish that we could pay people fairly. People like Rebecca Sloot, Samin Nosrat, they come because they're friends of mine and they're doing me a favor and they believe in this work. But we can't afford to pay them the honorariums that they deserve for coming and teaching. And that I would love, because it scares me from a legacy standpoint. If I were to leave, how would this work keep happening if I'm depending on my social network to make it happen? So, you know, I would like to see an endowment for this kind of work so that it keeps going. I'd like us to do some case studies that are publishable about the impact of this work, because other institutions have me come all the time and they say, well, how do we do this here? And I'm like, well, you need a me, and you need to pay them, and to get, you know, it's the pay peanuts, get monkeys situation. Like, if you want someone who really can help people publish, then there's someone who could get a job doing something else. And so we have to be competitive about that. And I think, you know, this isn't like a finger painting, nice to do thing in addition to medical training and practice. This is actually core to what we do. And, you know, we're seeing these like skyrocketing rates of people leaving their work. I was speaking at a huge healthcare system for Optum Health this last week in Boston. They have 20,000 physicians, and they have 3 people working on wellness and well-being. And that's way more common than it is not. And, you know, I think they are taking it seriously now and really investing in it because they can see that it actually really does affect the bottom line. People need to love what they do. They need to find meaning in what they do, or we lose them. So, you know, just from a functionality standpoint, it's important. But I also think, you know, when we pretend that medicine isn't a spiritual practice that isn't tied up with meaning and purpose, we get something very, very wrong. So I don't think this is a nice to have. I think this is essential. I'm biased, but that's what I'd love to see change. I'd love to see us financially support this kind of work and make it a core element of what we do. Thank you, Audrey.
Well, thank you so much, Laurel, for bringing such beautiful storytelling and bringing hope and inspiration to us and reminding us to turn towards our stories and each other. We're really blessed to have you today. Laurel's going to stay for the day. If you'd like to meet with her, you can just
Outside of noon.
Okay, well, just reach out to my Shelley and we'll find a time. And Laurel's actually going to give a prime workshop, writing workshop at 10:30. So our residents are in for more time with Laurel, which I know they will appreciate and benefit from so much. So
Thank you for being a
again.
warrior for all things good, Natalia. Thank you all.